All right, so our closing panel. I saw this as kind of an opportunity to revisit with some of our speakers from the day so that you have the opportunity to ask any last questions that maybe were in the back of your head or that popped up after one of their presentations or that came to you since. Also to give our panelists an opportunity to share anything that came to their minds on some of the discussions in the hallways, in the lobby, and whatnot. And to set the stage for this, I wanted to run through a set of slides that have evolved over time that Dr. Joel Groover from Western Illinois, I've seen him present it as a part of several presentations, and it kind of gets better each time I see it. He's very generous with sharing his content with me and says I can use it at any of my programs. And what it's titled is Characteristics of Success in Organics. And I think what you're going to see here, these are very high-level kind of bullet list of ideas, all the way from production to marketing to sort of your mindset that he's observed and others have observed that lead to higher likelihood of success in organics over the long term. Okay, so I just want to run through these to set the stage for our discussion, and then we'll kind of reflect on that. But I think you'll see that a lot of these themes we've heard all day and all day yesterday. So our panelist, just quickly, is Klaas, who we've heard from earlier. Some of you heard from Darren Fehr if you went to the other breakout room this afternoon. I'll let him introduce himself to the larger group. Megan Wallendal, I'll let her introduce herself as well, because that was during a breakout. And then I had to throw in an Indiana person, okay? And I chose Andy because he's on this slide, okay? No, I wasn't desperate. And he's taught me a lot. He's been farming organically since the get-go. So, all right. So not going to dwell on these too long. Focus on farming systems solutions. So we've heard a lot about systems thinking, right? Looking at the farm as a system. And some of the examples here, strategic sequencing of cover crops. Have we heard about that today? Just a little bit. And then integration of crop and livestock enterprises. That came out quite a bit in this no-till panel just previous to the break in here, with livestock being a way to eat our mistakes when something doesn't work right? Turning a failed no-till experiment into a good forage crop or a grazing opportunity. And I think that ties then very closely into this one. Flexibility in our farming systems. Those go kind of hand in hand. Having strong contingency planning. We heard that from Megan. Plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And on and on. Access to additional equipment, labor, and storage. And then I already mentioned this one about livestock eating mistakes. Okay, switching from kind of farming system to financial management. Being very focused on financial management. Being an entrepreneur, I think anybody who participated yesterday in the workshop, Will Glazig really hammered on this, how we need to think about capturing as much of that retail dollar as we can, looking for value-added opportunities where instead of selling a fairly low net return organic wheat crop, we look at how do we value-add that, turn that from a $150 net per acre into, $1,000 by running it through animals, turning it into vodka, getting ourselves out there, telling our story, marketing our farms. Effective use of technology. So proactive maintenance, adjustment, upgrading of equipment. I pointed folks to the playlist of videos from O-Grain, where Gary McDonald goes through a series of short presentations in front of the cultivator that he uses. Some of you were here last year. I think you can attest how he's really hyper-focused on keeping his cultivation equipment effective, well-adjusted, maintained. This one, openness and access to new technologies such as GPS guidance, upgraded planting units that can precisely deliver seed at optimal depth and spacing. In Aaron's presentation, Dr. Aaron Silva, on organic no-till research. She talked about the importance of having the right planter to get good seed placement, good seed singulation in those challenging planting environments, right? Focus on starting right, establishing a good stand. You can see the things there, well-adapted genetics. Effective residue management, preventing nitrogen tie-up, disease, pest issues, equipment malfunction, and this comes back to our crop cover crop sequence being crucial. Okay, we've heard this many times, timeliness of field operations, especially weed control. And something that ties into this, we heard it yesterday and probably some today, that having a good balance or crop rotation where we're not stretched to hit every acre at the same time with blind cultivation or row cultivation operations, that we have a good mix of crops that spreads us logistically, operationally, and with our labor is going to allow us to make sure that we're timely in those operations. Then this one gets to who's around us, having a strong support system. I hammered on this one yesterday in the workshop. Who's encouraging us, giving us caution, helping us to troubleshoot? Who can we soundboard issues off of? That's a challenge in Indiana, and that's one of the main reasons why I love these events, is that you can start to make these connections, because I'm working with farmers where there's not a single organic certificate holder in an entire county or a multi-county region in this state. So who are they turning to soundboard and get encouragement and look for information and advice, right? They've got to be on the phone. They've got to be on some of these listservs like Idea Farm Network, O-Grain, and so forth, connecting with me. I can try to connect people, but it's important to develop this strong support system around you. And then a few other things. This first one, if you listen to Klaas today, I think he touched on all of these. Excellent observation and attention to detail, lifelong learning and self-examination, and prioritized problem solving. So I've got these kind of bullet listed up here. If you guys could join us up here, and we'll kind of reflect on these different topics. All right, so we've got about 40 minutes, 40 minutes. And I don't know if let's start with introductions. Everyone has heard from Klaas today, so I don't think we need an introduction from him. But if you could just quick introduction, who you are, your farm, where it's at, scale, kind of crops you raise, just briefly.
Hi, my name's Andy Ambriole from the northeast corner of the state, Huntington County. Farm about 1,400 acres. Got started transitioning 50 acres back in 2007, kind of slowly grown from there. Primary crops are corn, soybeans, wheat, also do some barley and oats. Do a lot of cover crop every acre, every year. Did I hit everything?
Megan Wallendal with Wallendal Farms. Our farm is up in Grand Marsh, Wisconsin, which is in central Sands, 100% irrigated. We, these last couple years, we're about 3,300 acres. We are selling a bunch of land, so we're only 1,700 acres. It's on purpose, so that we can focus more on our specialty and put more of our energies where we're actually making some money. 800 of those acres are certified organic. Those crops are, we have corn and soy, but we also have a variety of vegetable crops, and including pumpkins and green peppers, cucumbers, things like that.
Hi, my name is Darren Fehr. I'm from Northwest Iowa. I've been certified organic since 1998. We grow primarily corn. We've grown soybeans, a lot of crops, flax. Presently we do like dry beans. This last year we did some canola. So I like to experiment, so I've experimented with a lot of different crops over the years, but we run I have about 1,500 acres, and I have my sons and hired man, they have another 1,000. So together we're about 2,500 acres of either all certified or some of it's in transition.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to kind of kick this off, and one that being in extension, someone who likes to create networking opportunities like this, I'd like to start with this characteristic of strong support system. So I've talked to Andy about this before. Andy, maybe you can start us off. When you started, 12, 13 years ago with transitioning, there weren't a lot of people to turn to.
It was pretty lonely out there.
So could you kind of talk about the efforts you made to connect with folks and who, what some of the key resources and people that you put around yourself to learn and try to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, meetings like today is a great opportunity, and Michael's done a great job in the last 3 years going from 0 to 60. So if we could give him a hand real quick.
I didn't plant that one.
When I got started, I had to travel a lot of miles. Went to some meetings over in Illinois, some over in Ohio, different field days, got to know some farmers. Of course, that far away, you kind of had to adopt, and, we weren't farming the same soils, but a lot of the ideas were, applicable. Did a lot of internet searches. In the beginning, Klaas talked about his weed control article from years ago. That was one of the first things I ran across on the internet. That was very helpful, trying to kind of get a basic foundation. Steel in the Field publication, that was great. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of events around here like this today. So it's a great opportunity. And over the years, organic is a kind of a small, tight-knit community, and you get to know a lot of people, and it's great to catch up and run into them. And the talks in the hallway are probably just as important as what goes on here in the main room. Bouncing different ideas. Hey, what worked for you this year? What didn't work? Things like that. So definitely recently, venturing out more onto social media has been another great avenue to come across different farmers that you might not run into, but it's nice to be able to share pictures and things like that, and kind of see what they're doing on your farm, and sometimes it'll spark an idea that you might be able to take away. It might not be an exact copy of what they're doing, but you can make it work for your farm as well.
Maybe coupled with that, any words of wisdom in terms of insulating yourself or dealing with maybe pushback or people within your community or network who thought, as you're getting into organic, questioning what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can be the crazy organic farmer. That's kind of the neighborhood stigma. I guess I was already kind of used to it. Growing up, my family raised hogs, and when I was in 5th grade, the hog market got so bad. Dad decided to sell the hogs, and I didn't know what to do with the hog buildings, so my parents got the great idea of raising earthworms. So all through school growing up, high school and everything, I was known as Worm Boy. So I guess I was kind of used to the ridicule, a lot of, and it's funny because, you might want to try to focus on a small amount of people, but the amazing thing is the amount of people that, kind of like to see what you're doing. It's funny. I've had several non-farm people stop, when you're growing diverse cover crops and you've got, pretty flowers and things like that out there. Everybody wants to know what that is. And I've had people cut sunflowers for senior pictures and weddings and things like that, it's great to make those, those touches where, normally if you're farming like everybody else, worrying about, trying to overbid the next guy on cash rent, it's more of a sense of a community than conventional, I'd say.
It makes me, shows how old I am. I was farming conventionally for 20 years before going organic. That was kind of a lonely place to be when we started, but really the biggest help came from your counterparts in New York in Extension. That we were able to go to the university and have people listen to our questions seriously, and when they didn't know the answers, help us get information, but also work with us to set up experiments. Now, we've always reciprocated by hosting graduate projects and experiments, and I feel like by helping researchers do their work, we actually benefited more than anyone else from that research because it was done on our farm. And I think what was even bigger than that was the sense of community that shares ideas, you know, that mutual support. Because when we started farming organically, the information out there was pretty thin. You know, it was a lot of it was anecdotal, a lot of it was wrong, unfortunately. You have an advantage today. There is a solid body of research out there on organic farming that you can trust. You know, you've got people that are operating very well-functioning organic systems that you can look at and emulate. And hopefully you can avoid making the stupid mistakes that I called paying tuition over the last 30 years. And from what I see, you've got the tools here, and you also have some really bright, innovative farmers, and that's your strength, along with some of the best soils in the world.
I echo what Klaas is saying with the working with the universities, and the extensions have been incredibly helpful for us. Those continuing education conferences have been really invaluable to us. It has introduced us to the pioneers of the field of the modern organic movement that can direct us to the publications we should be reading or the organizations we should be reaching out to for ideas. And then the collaborative sharing and the O-Grainer Idea Network have been really helpful for when someone sends an email, they did this, and what did someone think about this thing? Maybe I tried or didn't try one of those things. You go, oh, that's a really good idea. I wonder if that'll work in my area. So having all of these opportunities for education have been very helpful on our farm.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add. I would say to all of you, I think your learning curve is much, much shorter than what it was many, many years ago. I think it's to your advantage. I think when we started in 1998, I remember going to a conference, I don't know, Klaas, you spoke at Acres back in about 1999 or 2000 or something. There was events like that, but they were few and far between. Iowa really didn't have anything in the way of an organic conference like this, and really still doesn't have anything real solid. But my encouragement to you is just what they've said. Find somebody that's doing it well. Step into their world, ask them lots of questions, and do what they tell you to do. I feel like in many ways that's your quickest path to finding success. And as you grow, I think there's the opportunity to expand outside of that. The problem with we as farmers, we're fiercely independent. We want to do things our own way, and we want to put a little spin on it. And not that that's wrong, but sometimes it comes at a pretty high price of tuition. So I want to touch just a little bit on what Andy had talked about. It maybe isn't relevant, but I always have said there's 3 reasons more guys don't farm organically. One is they don't know what they don't know, and it's getting harder and harder to acknowledge that anymore because the media, the publications have talked about it a lot. Number 2, there's some guys that understand organic, but to be honest, they don't need to do anything different. They're well-established, multi-generational farms. They aren't going to make a switch, at least from a financial standpoint. The 3rd reason I say some people don't make the switch is the stigma that's attached to organic farming. And I think in general that is starting to change. I think the bar has been lifted. There are more and more successful, community-minded people who are making organic work and make it work well. And I think that works to your advantage. So it's hard to step away from the co-op mentality, to know that your circle of friends might change and you got to step into a different world. For some people, that's a pretty big step. But I think the learning curves and the success rates can be a lot higher if you're willing to just, find a mentor and step into that world and learn from them.
I'm just going to pose one more question, and then I want to encourage the attendees to please think of questions. I don't see any rolling in currently on the technology here, but I'll pose one more, and I hope that you'll get some thoughts going and be ready to ask some questions. So going back up to this focus on financial management, one of the ones in there was a sense of being entrepreneurial, right? Not just, okay, what's the organic corn market? How much can I get for my organic corn, my organic soybeans? I talked about Will with value adding. We heard what Wallendal Farms is doing with shrinking acreage and looking for higher value through specialty crops. I wonder if each of you could kind of talk or address a question that I hear quite often. And it's challenging for me to think through, and I think it's going to be more of a community-based approach, people working collaboratively, or individual entrepreneurship. It's easy for me to sell organic corn and soybeans. I've got buyers that call me, no problem. But what about these rotation crops? Where can I sell my small grains? Where can I do this? Klaas, there's established edible bean markets, or Megan, there's established edible bean markets. I wonder what advice you would give in terms of not just waiting for markets, but finding them, identifying them, creating them, and cultivating them. And any thoughts along those lines?
I would say your first step should be to find somebody else nearby who wants to grow the same things that you want to grow, wants to sell the same things that you want to sell. Because nothing will attract a buyer more than being able to say, I've got X number of acres or X number of farmers here who have this commodity available if you're interested in buying it. And we had a tremendous amount of success in the early years in New York of actually having this group of farmers invite potential buyers. The other thing that's really critical is infrastructure. We needed to be able to get our crops into a marketable condition. The cleaning plants are getting old. We did find some that were willing to transition to organic and were willing to clean our grains that we wanted to sell, because just having the grains there is not enough. They have to be in a marketable condition. But you've got companies who are represented here and others all over the United States who are now looking for organic. And it's certainly a worthwhile effort for a group of farmers to work together to do their marketing.
I think what Klaas said is something we've done, and it's important to do with your neighbors. I think you have a lot more power in numbers. It's not about trying to corner the market on your own. It's a lot more valuable to work collaboratively.
Yes.
What was part of the question again? Capturing the markets? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so rather
Yeah.
than like, okay, I can sell my organic corn, I can sell my organic beans, but these small grains, I can't get good prices, I can't find buyers, but I recognize I need rotation crops. So just any thoughts along the lines of identifying, cultivating new markets. You gave a great example this morning about the French beans, I believe.
Yep.
And how you're looking, okay, this isn't a market that we want to create for ourselves and capture, but that it's going to be
Quite
we
large.
want other farms in our community.
Yeah, so we're developing cassoulet bean, and it's sold in very small quantities in the U.S. It's not quite grown here. It's grown a lot in France, and France imports about $15 million worth of great white northern bean because they can't grow enough cassoulet in France. So we're developing a way to grow it here. It's been 6 years so far, and we've had to grow our own seed stock. And it's a climbing bean, and it's a little finicky, so we've been developing a system where it can be planted with our big John Deere 1820 planter combine with a big combine. So once we have the system down and we develop that export market, our plan is to open that up to other farmers. We are developing our own seed stock too, and we're going to be patenting it, but it'll be a PVP patent, meaning that a farmer can buy it, grow it. They can maybe market it through us, where we can help sell it collaboratively, but then they can grow their own seed and keep that and say, okay, I've got my seed for next year too. So we're trying to develop something that's beneficial for our neighboring farmers or somewhere else in the United States too. It doesn't have to be in Wisconsin or neighborhood. So it's something we're passionate about. I think that's important too, is if you're not passionate about dry beans, maybe don't do them, or maybe try a small plot to see if you would become passionate about them, is to really find something that you would want to put 110% into.
I'd maybe take just a little kind of tangent to the question. I realize the small grains are a difficult crop, sometimes to market, or at least to market for a profit. I would really encourage people to not get hung up only on that particular year, but to really look at them like a 3-year average. There's a lot of benefits that come to the small grain that can't be put down on a cash flow. I think Klaas alluded to that a little bit yesterday, or maybe this morning, about some other benefits of the biology and that sort of thing. So I do encourage you to do cash flows. I think that's very helpful. I keep cash flows out for the next 2, 3, 4 years. I look at my entire farm and look at crops across a particular field for multiple years as well. But don't be discouraged by that small grain year just because it's not as profitable, because it might be helping add $50 an acre on another crop, the following corn crop or whatever's following that small grain. So it's good to have good numbers. Get your spreadsheets out or work with somebody that can help you feel comfortable knowing that that small grain, it fits, and it fits in the big system, and it'll benefit you longer down the road.
Yeah, I would echo. Make sure and look at the whole rotation. Following or corn following a small grain with a summer cover crop for me has added 10 to 30 bushels of corn versus trying to go after soybeans. So you look at that at organic prices, it's a no-brainer. It also helps spread out your workload as well. To get that combine out in the summer, plant a crop in the fall. It just kind of makes it, especially if you have hired help or anything, you can keep those guys busy year-round and not just, a couple weeks in the spring and a month in the fall, and then have nothing to do the rest of the year. So some other things that I would suggest, have 100% on-farm storage. That's very critical. That's been a great marketing tool for me. And also a seed cleaner has helped too, especially on small grains and soybeans, being able to save your own seed and do that. And then also I've grown a small amount of cereal rye for my own cover crop seed. So that's another way to use the seed cleaner and kind of use some of your acres to go on the rest of the farm, where you're not actually having to search out a buyer. You can use your own products on your own farm. I think it's also important to look at not just the marketing on the sales side, but also on the purchasing side. I've been able to work with some neighbors on swapping forage for manure. That's worked very well. I was able to purchase an old country elevator that had drying facilities, some grain storage, and dry fertilizer storage. That's worked out very well. To be able to bring all those products on the farm, be able to buy in full semi-load quantities and get good prices. And then I don't sell a lot, but if I've got some other farmers that maybe want to go together, split a load, or need a few tons of this or that, I'm able to help them out too. So working together, everybody gets a better price and works out pretty well.
I could add one thing, and that's listen to your customers and study the market. Maybe the right question would be, what is the market demanding that they're not getting? I'll give an example. It's not an organic, but a few years back there was a real uproar about caged veal, or the tied veal, and there were a lot of veal operations in New York, and most of them responded by telling the customers they didn't know what they were talking about and that they really wanted the stuff they've been buying right along. There were two of them who asked a different question. They said, well, how much more will you pay me if I do it the way you want me to do it? And those two operations are selling veal at a much higher price now. It's costing them less. They've got healthier animals, and they've captured a market. And if we listen to our customers, we sometimes will find there are opportunities out there that are really too good to pass up. And one way that I like to listen to customers is study the food system. Study the changes. We've got people out there who are going vegan. Well, it works a whole lot better seeing how can I make your money into my money than to tell them that they shouldn't be vegans. And more successful.
Okay, one question came in, and it ties into the last 3 points there of observation, attention to detail, problem solving, lifelong learning, and self-examination. What was one of your biggest mistakes / learning experiences in your farming career?
I can give my most expensive one. I spent probably $40,000 on GPS equipment before any of it worked. And looking back, it was probably a piece of education I needed, but my son finally benefited from it. I was not the right generation to be bringing that technology on the farm. And knowing that, knowing ourselves is a help.
I used to kind of quip when I talk to people about my mistakes that I made at least a $30,000 mistake every year. I think it's more like 100,000 anymore. One of the things I would draw attention to, there's been times where we planted a field and all of a sudden the weeds are starting to come and it's going to be a battle. I have yet to be disappointed to tear up a field and start completely over. It's always been better to do that. It's hard at times to make that. You got a beautiful stand of corn coming, but you've got pick your weed that's in there really, really, really heavy. It's not worth it. So there's times where I've kept the field. I could show you a picture mowing down giant ragweed that's taller than my tractor and mowing 20 acres out of the field because I thought I'd be able to get it and I never could get it. So sometimes be willing and be humble enough to say, that was a mistake, I need to start over, and it might pay big dividends to do that. So it's an example of trying to stick with it, and I didn't need to.
I think understanding costs, so our produce, if our yield is quite low, I'm the one who I feel like we should go through and pick even when it's, if there's a little bit of good stuff, but the cost for the labor and the packing, we have to know our threshold of if we're only getting this many bushel boxes off this acre, then it's not going to be worth it to go through the rest of these 20 acres because it'll cost us a lot more than what it would to just leave it and wait for the next flush. So it's important to understand cost that way because we've definitely made the mistake where we just kept going and we actually cost us more money than to just say we're just going to stop harvesting. And that's a really hard thing to do too.
Yeah, probably I got a couple. First one would be pulling the plug on mistakes early instead of late. Had a couple experiences, weather hit wrong or whatever, and you're looking at maybe 40, 50 bushel corn out there, and you think, wow, $10, that's $400 or $500 an acre out there. I better save that. And it ends up, all you do is have weed pressure in that field for the next 2 to 3 years, where you could have torn it up, had a good cover crop, and had a monster corn crop the next year and made up those 40 or 50 bushels instead of dealing with giant ragweeds and foxtail and all that. So make sure and look the long term, not just 1 year at a time. It makes it tough sometimes, but in the long run, I've never regretted pulling the plug early instead of late. Another early mistake I made was trying to substitute organic inputs for conventional inputs and thinking that I'm going to get the same results. It's a little more complicated than just, I normally use 180 pounds of anhydrous, so I'm just going to figure out how much manure I need and spread that, and I'm good to go. It doesn't work like that. And, a cultivator is not a substitute for Roundup or other herbicides. Works totally different. So it's more about, adjusting your systems thinking and not just thinking you're going to substitute one for the other. Another thing I've found, the most economical input that I purchase on my farm is seed. We've got some great vendors out there, and I've worked with several of them, and most of them have a place somewhere on my farm. But use what's between your ears to design a system and supplement it where you need to. Don't depend on purchasing 100% of your nutrient needs or anything like that when there's a lot more economical ways to do it with biology and then also the environmental benefits as well, and long-term soil improvement on your farm.
I'd like to share one that I've fortunately missed making, but not by a lot. And it's affected a lot of farmers that I know, because, you know, being a little older, we've seen a lot of farmers who are really sorry when the next generation didn't want to do what they were doing, and where farms have actually ended up selling because their kids didn't want anything to do with what their parents were doing. And I think that can be a tough situation for a family. What I've found is that when I started farming, I didn't want to take over my parents' dream. I wanted to have my own dream. And I think it's really helpful to let the next generation carve out their own ideas and carve out their own piece of the farm, and not expect them to take over something that's already there, but to let them shape it in for what they want to do. And we've had very good success letting our part of the operation shrink as our son's part of the operation expands. A set of rules that really worked for us. It started early on. He started with a youth loan and started farming with an FSA youth loan when he was in 9th grade. That was his FFA project. And we set a ground rule, and that was, if you're going to pay for the mistake and own it, if it's a mistake, you're going to have the last word. If I pay for the mistake and own it, I have the last word. He had to remind me several times that we had made that deal. But it's a good thing I stuck to it.
Okay, I had a few more questions come in on the Slido app, but there might be some folks who don't have a phone or whatever, or a good connection, so I wanted to give an opportunity for free questions from the audience. So go ahead, Matt. Is there an always or never rule that you live by that you haven't brought up yet? That's the question? Okay. An always or never rule that you live by.
I would say always be honest with myself. Own a mistake before doubling down on it.
It's a deep question.
I don't know if this fits exactly, but my probably primary rule would be biology first. You look at the history of organic. Organic means carbon. We need to focus on the carbon and the carbon-based life forms. That's the basis of our crops. That's the basis of good soil ecology. You know, there's a lot of things you can do, but if you focus on the biology first, you're going to have success long term.
Never discount an idea. Flesh it out, even if it takes 2 minutes to flesh it out, and you know, or this is a idea I've already thought of and fleshed out. Flesh it out with that person asking it, because they haven't gotten there in their head. So always flesh out an idea.
I think I'm still learning too much. I don't know that I can ever. There's just too many things I don't know, and I think there's some wisdom in being somewhat flexible. I don't disagree with anything that's been said here, though, already. There's so much to this whole biology, everything, and I think being nimble enough to make changes if you need to. And I think there's some humility, I think, as well. You're going to make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. I think that there's many a cliche-ish term that says that sometimes failure is our best teacher, and so be willing to risk a little bit, but at the same point in time, don't stray too far from some of the truths and the good practices that are out there. So,
I've got a never assume that you know something. I mean, in my short farming career, things have changed rapidly, and I can't imagine what it's going to be, you know, over the next 30, 40 years. You know, things that we knew in agriculture 5-10 years ago, they weren't necessarily 100%. So, you know, the field of soil biology is still so new. There's still more that we don't know than we do know. So never be afraid to change, and never be afraid to, you know, back up from a problem and maybe look at it over from that direction, because it's, you know, agriculture is not a constant. It's always changing.
Yeah, and I guess I could echo that as someone working in extension. What Darren said about learning, constantly learning, and the more you learn, you feel like the less you know. So if you ever call me and we have discussions and you feel like I'm not answering your questions and I'm not being prescriptive, well, it's because the more I learn, the more I'm like, boy, I can't give specific prescriptive answers.
I'd like
Very complex systems that we're working with.
I'd like to share an observation from our next generation. And it was a criticism that I didn't take real well at first till I thought about it and realized he was right. It was my son said, "Dad, how come you're not as innovative as you used to be? How come you're not as eager to try new things? You know, why aren't you taking the chances?" And I've observed it's people in their 20s and 30s who change the world because they don't have limits. Once we've gotten to my age, our successes and our experiences have boxed us in and defined what's possible, and also limited what's possible. And I think we really need to encourage having young people and having them try their dreams, even if it seems silly. There's some things that I told my son would never work that I'm really happy to report I was dead wrong about.
Other questions from the audience? I know they're out there.
With the system, all the different systems, and having things so complex to manage everything, do you have any good ways that you go about making timely decisions? Just solid way of just making those decisions. Exactly.
There's a realization when there's a tough decision that not making the decision is already a decision in itself, and it's almost always a wrong one. So I think one thing I try to keep reminding myself is that sometimes you have to make a decision, and you may have more than one decision that's right or that works out, so that you're better off go ahead and make the decision, live with it, and realize that you can live with it.
Were you referring to like tillage operations and planting and things like that, just in general? I mean, I know that some of the old timers would say, the moon, the Farmers Almanac, the buds on the trees, things like that. I don't necessarily find that to be as helpful for me. Sometimes it's just instinct, and you have to go with something like Klaas says and just move forward and make the best decision you can, and maybe don't do everything. Stop. I'm a big advocate for doing with today's RTK and mapping and things like that. Do some block trials. Do some things differently. If you don't know what's the right thing to do, make it be a test and use it to your advantage, and then share it with some other people, because other people are probably trying to figure the same thing out. So is there one secret solution? I don't think there is. I haven't found it anyway. So
I'd say probably the biggest thing is leave strips. If you don't know, or even if you think you made the right decision, leave strips. Try something else on a small area. I've had some things it's like, how did that pull through? That was almost giving up for a loss. And another thing is I've probably learned more from mistakes than intentional experiments. So be willing to, if you make a mistake at planting, or if you think you're a few days late with the first blind harrowing, you know what? Do the best you can and leave it and watch it the rest of the year. I think a lot of guys get too caught up on what the field looks like when you drive by in the pickup and never actually get out in the field. I try to be out in most fields weekly or bi-weekly. It doesn't always happen, but I try. And just walking through the field, you can make a lot of observations. And then, when you are sitting in the cab for hours and hours at a time, it gives you a lot of think time. So why did I see this? What do I think's going on here? It's hard to shut my mind off at times, but it's invaluable to at least make the observations. Because if you're just driving by a field and, oh, that's got some weeds out there, I'm not going to look at it the rest of the year, you really missed out. So.
Dan.
I was just wondering if you could name one piece of technology that you've adopted that gave you like your best payback, whatever it would be?
Well, for me, it was the yield monitor. I mean, clearly you have to have a starting point. So I would say in my operation, just 2005, I think I put a yield monitor in, and once you have that, you can start correlating things and tile lines and weed patches and everything. So I mean, I would assume most of us have probably moved to that point, but if you haven't, I would encourage that. After that, we have gone to RTK. I don't know that you have to. I mean, that's where the art of cultivating comes in if you have to do it the hand way. But I mean, certainly RTK is a game changer for most of us in terms of the effectiveness of our tillage applications. But I'd start with the yield monitor.
I'd say the RTK has been incredibly valuable. Also, getting our planter to the precision plant has been really valuable to make sure our singulation and spacing and depth are all very consistent.
I would have to back up the RTK after saying I wasted $40,000. Because when my son finally got it to work, it was valuable. And I'll give an example, and you may not have the situation here. Because of our slopes, because of our strips, maintaining strip edges is really important. And the best you can do by hand is going to be plus or minus 5 feet. And that guarantees a strip of weeds in between every place there's a strip edge. And when you've got narrow strips and lots of them, that's a lot of weeds. With our current RTK, we're able to eliminate every bit of that so that you can farm every other strip and come back in between and have the rows come out right. The other piece of technology, again, that my son brought on, and I'm really lucky that I was able to step back and go along with it, was the camera guidance, which I was skeptical of. And it didn't work real well at first. But by going to a camera-guided cultivator, it made the finger weeders possible. It really increased our capacity per day of being able to get over the fields. And once that technology was working, it has really paid back well. And it allows a lower skilled level help to come in and do the job, or at least a different skill. We don't have to have this cultivating used to take years to learn how to do a good job. And this technology has changed that. Now, I have to say it takes years to learn how to operate the technology. But it's a lot easier to find someone who can operate the technology than someone who wants to spend the hours in the sun learning the cultivator.
I guess it kind of depends on what your definition of technology is. As far as dollars returned versus dollars spent, probably the highest on my farm would be cover crop seed. Number 2 would be drainage tile. And number 3 would be some kind of assisted steering. You don't have to go out and spend $40,000. You know, there's cheap systems out there that will steer your tractor in a perfectly straight line for under $2,000. And still, maybe you still drive manually with the cultivator and other passes, but if you set up your planting pass perfectly straight, it sets you up for success the rest of the year. So you don't have, even on, you're starting on a small amount of acres, you don't have to go out and drop big money, at least get started somewhere. And these systems you can always add on and get more accuracy, easier to use and things like that.
I think too, if you're doing a lot of your own financials or figuring out your own cost of production, taking an Excel class or a QuickBooks class might be incredibly valuable, and make it a little bit easier for you to set up all of your, set up your own scenario analysis on the computer.
Okay, so we're up against time. We could take one more question if there's one burning from anybody in the audience. If not, I'd like to ask our panelists if they have any last thoughts to share or impart with the conference. Darren, I don't know, you were grabbing that mic. I don't know if you had a last thought you want to share.
Well, I was just building on what Megan said too. For years and years, and comes a little bit from my own financial background, I said the number one tool on my farm was my spreadsheet. And that's still an advice, whether it's a conventional farmer or organic farmer. I think we need to understand that it empowers you to make necessary investments and decisions in whether it's new storage, whether it's new equipment upgrades. If we don't understand, I don't necessarily advocate you got to know down to the cost per bushel. I think that's overkill. But you at least need to build cash flow, pro forma cash flows that can really help you. So I certainly support that. Just in closing, I would say building on Klaas's comment about the next generation, that's another passionate point that I like to make to older farmers that are at least my age. If the next generation is not invested and committed and believing, I tend to think it's going to be hard to find hired labor. There are exceptions, please accept that there are exceptions where you can find hired people that are very willing to step into that role. But I do think for the long term, for the success of your farm, your legacy and all that, make sure you have got the next generation, give them an opportunity to step in, to take ownership, to believe in what you're doing, include them as part of the decision that are being made, whether it's a grain bin upgrade or a tractor upgrade or a technology upgrade or even a cropping sequence. I sometimes, my son says, I want to do this, and I'm going, whoa, 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 whoa. Why? But I need to let him do it. And I'm finding, just as Klaas says, it's better to let them kind of experience it because they own that mistake, they own that experience. And the organic opportunity is very legitimate. It's rewarding. I love the challenge personally to go out and try to I'm competitive in that nature. I want to succeed, and I believe it can be done. At the same time, I'm learning that there are elements of a quality of life, lifestyle, just the overall stress, dealing with things that we can't control like the weather, that are different than from a conventional world. And yourself and the people around you need to embrace those challenges and believe that, yes, it might be a hard year this year, but we're going to press on and make it to the next year. So I think if you have those elements in your operation, success can happen organically. And if you're willing to learn and ask questions and being free to step into this organic space when it's different than the conventional world, without shame, you have every reason to be successful.
I'm seeing one technology that I'd like to make sure that we don't skip over. And I'll give the example of hybrid corn came along in the 1930s and 40s. It was a hard sell to farmers when it came out. Where would we be if it hadn't been adopted? We're talking about cover crops and about more diverse cropping systems. I had an intern on our farm who, when we were harvesting rye once, I shared this with some of the guys here already, when he came to me and he said, you guys don't know a thing about growing rye in this country, do you? And I said, probably not. What can you teach me? And he said, in this would be the eastern sections of Germany, if you're not getting 200 bushel rye, you don't know how to farm. This was after harvesting some 40 bushel rye that I thought was pretty good. There's the technology that's producing those phenomenally high yields is hybrid seed. Rye is an outcrossing plant, and I think we're lulled. All the other small grains are self-pollinated plants, so are soybeans. Corn is an outcrossing plant. It's not very fertile if it pollinates with itself. Rye is the same way. One of the reasons we get poor rye yields here is that these varieties have become mongrelized and they're not very fertile, and we end up with not very many seeds per head compared to what we could have. I've counted as many as 80 seeds in a head of hybrid rye. Much bigger seed than what we're used to getting. And I think as we push ahead and want to do these cover crops, everything we do, we ought to do as best we can. Let's not accept low small grain yields as necessary. German organic farmers feel they failed if they get under 140 bushel of oats. If they feel they failed if they're down in the 100 bushel range in rye. There's nothing they can do that Americans can't do better.
Well, I think there's been a lot of good things said today, all day. I don't have too much more to add to it. I just encourage everybody, if you've taken some notes or seen some new ideas that interested you, make sure and put together a plan of action, how you're going to implement those this year, because planning might seem like a long ways off, but it's going to be here before we know it. And I know I've gone to events like this before and thought, you know what, I should do this. And then before I know it, 2 or 3 years go by and it's like, you know what, I thought that was a good idea at the time. I still think it's a good idea, but I haven't done anything about it. So, do it on a small scale, but always be thinking and always be trying something new.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that. We are a little bit past 5 o'clock. I think folks would be happy to hit the road. Let's give our panelists and all of our speakers today a hand.